OJ, this for Central Cali right here. Yeah. Keep the poor from out my rights. Immigration ain't an issue for the right, cause it ain't right to have the right to keep the laws in favor of the job creator. When the job creator ship a factory for cheaper labor low enough to keep the people quiet and complacent. When the money's getting spent right on the soil that's adjacent to the place where they are starving. So hop a fence, coffee in my blood will keep the dogs up off my scent. Skin color versus the board of education. If you ain't catch that line, then you should study segregation. This is rap mediation. Time to snap you right back.
Hello, comrades. Welcome to Workers' Truth. This is Volgin, and I'm joined by my fellow host and comrade, Magne.
Hello.
Today we will be discussing the topic of whether or not people on the left, whether it be Marxists, socialists, or just leftists in general, should support Bernie Sanders in this next election. But before we begin, let's have a brief F in the chat for my co-host's hair, which recently suffered a tragic fire incident caused by the lighter of the great comrade Volgin when researching this topic.
Lots of fire and lots of hair burning. Entirely my hair.
Oh yeah, exclusively. It was
exclusively my hair burning. So that's great.
Well, I could have let it all burn, but I blew it out. Anyways, so recently. Well, not recently. It's been going on since the campaign started. There has been discourse on whether or not leftists should support Bernie Sanders. Some say we should, that'll help working people, in the short term, it'll get things like universal health care, like college education, while other people say no, he's an imperialist, you're supporting the colonial state. I've seen some people on like various social media platforms. Some people, support him, some people don't. We're just gonna look at it from both sides and come to a conclusion. So let's begin with let's start with, like, we're not gonna go like this in broad. We're gonna discuss specifically the question, should you support Bernie Sanders? But first, let's give a little background to the man.
So Bernie Sanders, we're going to start with his political background mostly. If you're interested in his life itself, you can research on your own, but we're here for the politics of the man mostly. So we're going to start with where he really got his start in political activism in the 60s. So in the 60s, he was an organizer and activist with the Congress for Racial Equality. He was also involved at times with the Young People's Socialist League, which is the youth arm, or was the youth arm of the SPUSA, the Socialist Party of the United States of America. He was also involved with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and other numerous groups during the time. With these groups, he engaged in a lot of civil rights protests and issues. There was numerous occasions of him joining in and leading and organizing protests against segregation in Chicago. At one point, he was arrested in a 63 protest. There's the famous image that's gone around of him being arrested and hauled off by police during a protest against segregation. He also attended the March on Washington with Martin Luther King Jr., and at this time as well, he started getting engaged in the anti-war movement.
Little known fact, that picture you were talking about, that's actually false. That was him getting hauled off by the Spartacists after he killed Rosa Luxemburg in 1919.
It is a common misconception.
Yeah, but no, Bernie did kill Rosa. But anyways, so we'll move on to the 70s. So in the early 70s, he joined this party called the Liberty Union Party, which was I think it was exclusively Vermont. It wasn't a nationwide.
Yeah, it was a Vermont-based party.
And he started working with other left figures like William H. Meyer and a little-known Italian author named Michael Parenti, who
may have heard of him before.
Yeah, he wrote some obscure books such as To Kill a Nation, The Attack on Yugoslavia, and The Assassination of Julius Caesar. So during and actually. Parenti and Bernie became friends well into the 90s from that point. He ran for the House, and Bernie ran for numerous seats in the Liberty Union ticket, usually either the Senate or governor.
Yep.
And he also produced a documentary on Eugene V. Debs' resignation from, was it the...
From the Liberty Union.
Oh,
After his resignation from the Liberty Union Party. He got involved in a store, I believe it was, that was selling VHS tapes, or VHS tapes. Yeah, sorry. Other things of that, and during that time ended up producing a quite popular at the time documentary on Eugene V. Debs in the socialist movement that he was involved with. Just a quick little fun fact I always love about his engagement with Michael Parenti and friendship is that Parenti's talked on Bernie before, and in one blurb that he had given about his time being friends with Bernie and working with him, he cracked a little joke about how in '74 Parenti had ran on the House on the Liberty Union ticket, and Bernie had ran for Senate in Vermont on the Liberty Union ticket. And in a surprising case, Parenti actually came out with a higher percentage of support, with 7%, compared to Bernie only coming out with 2% of support in his race.
See, if it were Parenti running, it's clear that he would obviously have the presidency in his hand.
Parenti would be our new president and the greatest president.
Oh, yeah.
So, moving on to the 80s, this is where Bernie really starts to take off in his engagement in activism, and electoral politics especially. He ran for the mayor of Burlington, Vermont as an independent and ended up winning. He talks about, in his book, Our Revolution, about how he created a wonderful coalition.
It was a magnificent coalition that we created as mayor of Burlington, Vermont.
This great coalition that he got together, made up of some great elements, such as many of the poor activist organizations in Vermont, unions, general progressive activists, and environmentalists. He also teamed up with the cops and the police union as well to get their support, offering to increase their budgets and so forth.
Look, Maine, look. As long as it's Vermont workers, I don't care what the ramifications are. That's how I do it.
That's a recurring trend you'll find with some of our...
It is a heavy trend in Bernie's outlook on a lot of issues.
Yeah.
So at this time in the 80s, Bernie was heavily critical of U.S. foreign policy in Latin America, and at this time also became an associate of everyone's favorite, whatever he likes to describe himself based upon the season, lecturer and professor Noam Chomsky, Mr. Linguistics himself.
He's currently homeless Santa Claus.
Homeless
dying Santa Claus.
He's gone from a great position of a professor to an even greater position of homeless Santa Claus.
Homeless dying Santa Claus.
Dying Santa Claus.
No, before he was the professor that was on the verge of falling asleep. Now he's just dying and homeless.
And that was, of course, the professor on the verge of falling asleep, of course, came after his tenure as the professor who liked to make a common thread of defending Pol Pot.
Yeah, while also criticizing the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
Well, if you study historical materialism, you would realize that this is the general progression. But
so that aside, as well in the 80s, Bernie and his wife Jane had taken what is now their infamous honeymoon to the Soviet Union, visiting the country, which, yeah, completely understandable. Coming back to the U.S. and doing a little lecture on their time, talking about how amazing the public transport was in the Soviet Union and how the arts were amazingly funded. And as I believe they talked about, the amazing theaters that they saw everywhere and just the overall amazingness of the system, which that would only last for a little while.
oh yeah.
So he as well in the 80s did a little fun thing that I would not recommend looking into for the sake of your own ears. He ended up creating as the mayor of Burlington, Vermont, and what was a seemingly cool gesture, but as a end product, terrible. A thing that might just be the worst folk album ever.
White people, am I right?
Very white. It mostly combined folk with reggae music, spiced in with a little bit of Bernie doing some wonderful spoken word renditions of "This land is your land and we shall overcome."
This land is your land. This land is my land.
No, it was a cool concept. He got together a lot of activists.
Music critic over here.
Activists and local musicians. And it just ended up turning out to absolutely horrendous, very white garbage. So, don't listen to that. Just take our word.
I don't think anyone listening to this was planning on listening to Bernie Sanders' grassroots folk album.
I would hope so. I just really wish that out of that, honestly, the only good thing that could have come out of that is Bernie founding what needs to be done, and that's the Burlington, Vermont Philharmonic Jam Band. It needs to be a thing. Actually, no, it doesn't. Especially led by him.
Yeah.
Oh, God, the horror.
So after he was mayor of Burlington, he ran for the House of Representatives as an independent in 1990. He won, and he served in the House from 91 to 07. He was the longest serving independent?
Longest serving independent, I believe, up till that point.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about that.
We'll go more in depth with his House record. But so, then going into the 2000s, he was in the House when the War of Terror began.
That beautiful, beautiful thing.
And where he was very contradictory
boy, was he.
in his voting. But he later ran for the Senate in 2006. He actually got endorsements from like Chuck Schumer and stuff for it. Did you know that?
Endorsements, Howard Dean, Chuck Schumer, Harry Reid, Obama, all of them endorsed him.
Yeah. And I believe he was nominated by the Vermont Democratic Party. There was no Democratic opposition. It was just the Republican.
Yeah, I believe it was that there was an agreement that they would run him in their primary for him to be their candidate, and that he had said that if he were to win, he would not accept the nomination, but would essentially be just the Democratic candidate.
Yeah, because he's part of all their caucuses, like in the Senate, right?
He's caucused with the Dems ever since he became a senator, and I believe in the House as well.
Yeah.
So with that little quick summary, I say it would be time to move on to his wonderful, wonderful contradictory record.
Okay, well, let's start in the 80s. He supported Ortega and the Sandinistas against the Contras and the Reagan administration, and he even met with Ortega and provided him with good advice of how to appeal to the U.S. public.
Yep.
Then he sold his soul, and truly, I mean, he kind of did with the whole police union thing. And then he joined the House, and this is where the relationship with Parenti deteriorated. Now, they were pretty good friends from the 70s to the mid-90s, but one of Parenti's big things was one of his most famous books, To Kill a Nation, The Attack on Yugoslavia, was the Yugoslav Wars of the 90s after Yugoslavia broke apart into several different countries. And, of course, Parenti was anti-war. He was anti-imperialist. Bernie, however, supported the Clinton administration and the bombings of Yugoslavia, and was very pro-NATO, very pro-intervention, and that's when they broke. And I don't think Parenti's talked to him since.
No, he hasn't. And Sanders himself, I believe, to this day has not showed regret or remorse or opposition to the actions that were taken by the Clinton administration during the bombings, even after it came out, of course, that that essentially what were committed in those bombings were war crimes, that civilians were targeted, that there were specific targetings of ethnic groups to try to fuel
ethnic tensions
that were ongoing, as well as one wonderful incident that no one really likes to talk about, how the U.S. literally bombed the Chinese embassy, killing pretty much, if not everyone in the embassy, which is, a direct violation of not only international law, but also, I would have to assume, many many, treaties on the rules of engagement and so forth. So he did that. He'd supported the bombing of Yugoslavia hardcore. It even led to staffers of his resigning over his support of it, because they just couldn't stand what a flip it had been. Because up until that point, he'd been a pretty anti-war figure.
He was against the Gulf War, right?
Yeah, he had voted against the Gulf War authorization and the bombing. But for some reason with this, he just turned on a dime and began supporting the U.S. imperialist state in its bombing of Yugoslavia, in its funding and support with NATO, and in just an insane turn of opinion. To the point where, like, Parenti, as we had mentioned, who was really good friends with Bernie up until that point, literally just cut off contact, stopped talking to him, wouldn't visit him anymore, wouldn't visit with his kids, just stopped talking to him flat out.
I think that, because let's remember, the Gulf War was 1990, 1991, so I think that was, like, right when he first became a member of the House.
Yeah.
So Yugoslavia was, like, what, 96, 97? It was, like, when the bombing started.
Yeah.
Yugoslavia broke up right around the same time that the Soviet Union did. So, like, the early 90s was kind of when it started to break down. So, but the U.S., the official NATO intervention, I don't think started till the mid to late 90s.
No, and to pull in an anecdote, the Liberty Union Party, actually, after he resigned from the party, after he lost his election, running on their ticket for like the 50th time, they began to oppose him quite heavily. Many of the members to this day will talk about how he had just seemed to, as the party was making a leftward turn, he just deviated to the right in a way that for their politics at the time was insane, especially for someone who had dedicated so much time into the party. And when it came to the bombing of Yugoslavia, they were heavily opposed to Bernie and his actions, coming to the point of giving him a great nickname for his support of the bombings, Bomber Bernie, which they have stuck with a good bit to this day, which to this day they're still not fans of Bernie. So with that was the first kind of turn with Bernie and his principles. Now we move on to the next part of his record, which is the kind of period around really early 2000s, like 99 to 2003.
Yeah, it's the 9/11, the beginning of, I wouldn't say intervention in the Middle East, because that's not true, because the U.S. has been meddling with the Middle East since the end of World War II.
But boots on the ground.
But rather the increase, the quote-unquote justification.
Yeah.
So in 2001, 9/11 happened, and I think literally like a few weeks later this was approved. Bernie voted in favor of H.R. Resolution 64, which authorized the use of military force, just in general, which basically gives a blank check to whatever administration's in charge that, hey, you can, invade this country if you want, which is completely unconstitutional. Not that either side of the bourgeois spectrum cares about the Constitution or not, even though they say they do. But then he voted to authorize the war in Afghanistan, which turned out to be a complete lie, what was going on there.
And he has voted since numerous times to fund the war, voting on numerous, and we'll point that out in a minute, but numerous authorizations for the military budget to fund the intervention into Afghanistan.
And now he says it was a mistake voting to authorize the war in Afghanistan, which, wow, hindsight. Then
Hindsight is 2020, as his supporters would say. Yeah, it's a dumb slogan.
They think it's funny because that's stupid.
Yep.
Then, so this is what his supporters have mainly tried to say, that show as evidence that he's anti-imperialist. He opposed the Iraq War originally. With the authorization, he said that it'll
destabilize the region if we take out Saddam Hussein.
But he voted to fund the war, saying that he said that, well, if we're going to invade, we might as well help out the occupiers, the U.S. troops.
We gotta support the troops,
Well,
guys.
look, I voted to fund the war because the troops needed to have nice equipment while they were murdering innocent Iraqi children.
We can't let the troops be using outdated weapons to kill the children.
Exactly.
It's unacceptable.
So yeah, he voted to fund the Iraq War despite saying that he keeps saying that when this Iran stuff came out, he kept saying that, oh well, I voted against the Iraq War, but he never talks about how he voted to. I voted against the Iraq War, but he never talked about how he voted to fund the Iraq War. And then there's the sanctions.
Oh boy, does he love his sanction bills.
He has because sanctions are a very liberal, like it's not direct, it's not military warfare. It's not like,
It's, in their eyes, it's not violent.
It's
which
not
it is.
It's not
but
violent. He voted for the Iraq Liberation Act of 1998, which literally only came about because Bill Clinton needed a distraction from his White House activities, which put sanctions on Iraq and bombed Iraq too. And then he voted on numerous occasions for the sanctions against Iran and Libya. And here's the thing about sanctions. Sanctions are not, soldier versus soldier drone strikes, but they're economic warfare, because what they do is they strangle a country, deprive it of trade and resources, so then it basically starves their people to the point where, like, it becomes very destabilized. Take Iran, for example. Iranians now have a very hard time obtaining certain medicines because of the sanctions put on by the U.S. imperialists. The DPRK is incredibly sanctioned, and to the point where they're very isolated from the world market, and then the propagandists say that, well, that's because they're a hermit kingdom, which is not true. During the Cold War, the DPRK was very friendly with a ton of nations, both socialist and anti-imperialist. Just Kim Il-sung was practically friends with everybody during that time. They had relations. They still have relations with a lot of countries. But the problem is that they can't directly trade with the world market because of all the sanctions that have been brought on by the imperialists.
And I think it's important to just stress that sanctions, as so many in the liberal establishment and the national security establishment love to talk about, is that they are, a non-violent way to put pressure on authoritarian regimes the world over, and that they are specifically targeted to hurt the regimes and not the people. The problem with that is that's absolute fucking bullshit. They say they're specifically targeted. The problem is the way they're specifically targeted most of the times ends up targeting individuals that have interests in massive industries in the country, thus targeting the whole industries. And when you target entire economic industries, it's eventually going to trickle down and fuck over the people of that country. I think Venezuela is a great example of this, where the CEPR, the Center for Economic Policy Research, did a study, I believe, a year ago on the effects of sanctions in Venezuela, and came to the conclusion through their study that overall the sanctions in Venezuela have up to this point led to the deaths of at least 40,000 Venezuelans. These sanctions aren't nonviolent. They're not a way to put pressure on a regime without hurting the people. That's their purpose. Their purpose is to hurt the people, to starve the people, and kill the people in an attempt to get the people of a country that they're targeting to turn on their own government because of the conditions brought about by these sanctions and U.S. imperialist intervention and fuckery in their countries.
Bernie has also expressed a lot of interest in the in drone programs. He's said that he refuses to end the drone program. He promises to use the drone program selectively, which is probably complete bullshit. And with the he's also supported the F-35 drone program, saying, "My view is that given the reality of the damn plane, I'd rather it come to Vermont than to South Carolina. And that's what the Vermont National Guard wants, and that's what hundreds of jobs, and that means hundreds of jobs in my city. That's it."
He's been one of the very vocal. He hasn't even been quietly supportive of the F-35 jet program. He's been quite vocally supportive of the program ever since its founding. And to this day, he still defends the program that's wasted. I think they've argued up now that it's hundreds of billions. I think they've even that up to like $1 trillion wasted on this program.
Oh, they're always throwing away money on shit like that.
Yeah, that's done what? Produced literally a jet that is like a decades old in comparison to the rest of the world's new modern jets. So, like, not only is it just a funding of an imperialist project to create more and better ways to kill people that we don't like or we want to exploit their resources, it's also a great case of him engaging in the thing he so loves to critique, of bureaucratic, wasteful government spending that doesn't help the people. It's nothing more than a pork barrel project to funnel billions of dollars to the military-industrial complex while creating absolutely nothing worth value, both just to the military but to the people in general. It's the thing he loves to critique and loves to harp on, but it's something that he directly is engaged in and has no remorse or no conscious objection to it.
Well, let's also look at it from another perspective too. The way his wording, he says that, well, you know, if it creates hundreds of jobs, that's what he wants. That is a very like fucking pro-imperialist, you know, honestly like white supremacist type thing. Like, oh well, you know, we'll just bomb this country because at least it's creating jobs.
It's the same justification that both Clintons have used for supporting war, that so many in the Democratic Party and its neoliberal establishment has used to defend the wars. Like, when they're called out on it, they'll be like, oh, it's not a great thing, but it's creating jobs, so I can't oppose it because it would hurt my constituents.
You know, it's you know what it is? It's chauvinism. That's what it is.
It is.
It's chauvinism because it's saying, well, you know, this jet's going to be used to bomb poor brown people, but as long as my constituents, the workers here are getting some benefit out of it, then it's okay. It's social chauvinism. It's just like what they fucking did. What these fucking so-called leftists have been doing for 100 years, at least. And it's what people like him are going to continue to do.
Oh, and it's not just that he's been a vocal supporter of it, he's voted in favor of it. And not only that, he's himself directly lobbied to get production plants built in Vermont to work on this fucking F-35 jet program. Like, he has literally facilitated the production facilities to create this imperialist machine of war, and he has no remorse, no single fucking care about the internationalist, you know, ramifications of it, the effect that building these machines of war has on the workers of the rest of the world. And not only that, to harken back to his 80s, his record wasn't all nice and peachy in the 80s. I mean, there's the whole police union thing, but besides that, he tended to be okay. But he also loves, in his fashion of loving the police, he actually called up for their assistance in having peace activists arrested when he was the mayor of Burlington, when they were engaged in blocking the front gates of a GE weapons factory that was located in Burlington. They were there protesting the production of imperialist machines of wars, the same machines that were being used to oppress and to exploit and to destroy the countries that he so talked about defending and that we shouldn't be involved in. The people actually on the ground trying to fight that shit, blocking the gates, he had them arrested. And this isn't the first case of him having peaceful activists arrested when they've opposed him and his contradictory bullshit.
Then there's Venezuela, which he's so often associated with. He has referred to President Maduro as a dictator. However, in his more, I guess, left, if you even call what he is left, deviation, he opposes military intervention in Venezuela because he'll vote for the sanctions, but, direct intervention. We don't want to get directly involved.
No boots on the ground. That's just, we can't do that.
But he has not condemned Guaido or the coup attempts. Not even just one attempt. Attempts. There's been multiple attempts at it, and he has attacked the Bolivarian revolution and Bolivarian socialism as authoritarian, which is just not true.
Yeah, at one of the recent debates, he was asked in the typical right-wing fashion. I think it may have been the CNN debate, because it sounds like something CNN would do. Is there like, well, you say you're a socialist, but what about Venezuela? And they're like, how is your socialism different from the evil, authoritarian, murderous regime of Nicolas Maduro? And he was like, well, you see, my socialism is a democratic socialism, not an authoritarian socialism like the socialism practiced in Venezuela by Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro.
See, that's such fucking bullshit, because, from what I've heard from, the more, I guess, I call them center-left types, the ones that actually unironically use the term democratic socialist, which isn't it. The democratic socialist, they're not real. If you're thinking about someone who runs for office that's yes, I want to, collectivize them. I want to, fucking seize the means. I want the workers to control the means of production. Those are just socialists. There's not democratic socialism is so redundant because socialism is democratic. It's the most democratic, system on earth.
This is the thing about the democratic socialists, the self-described democratic socialists that are just sock dems. Literally, if you look at the national stage as well as onto the state level stage, the only actual person who's elected in any position of government who describes himself as a democratic socialist, who actually talks about seizing the means of production from an actual socialist perspective, is Lee Carter of Virginia. Literally the only fucking one. Everyone else who self-describes as a democratic socialist is nothing more than an imperialist lapdog and a social democrat.
Yeah, I mean, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is another good example. Everyone likes to describe her, cause, she's part of the DSA.
Yeah.
But she's even worse than Bernie is.
Yeah. Let's not talk about the fact that she literally, her biggest point when she was running was abolishing ICE, and then the first vote she engages in, she gets in the House, is funding ICE.
Well, you see, yes, but actually no. You see, she was playing both sides, so no matter what, she could come up on top.
And let's also not forget that she just came out recently in a tweet and said that when we say abolish ICE, we don't mean end, customs and border protection and all that stuff. We just mean abolish the organization.
Yeah.
Which means just replace it with another piece of shit white supremacist organization.
Well, I mean,
she's the same exact thing.
Well, she's approved funding for ICE too in
numerous times
because she's part of the House. So that the way they handle the budget, but we're getting off topic. Yeah. Back to Bernie. No, but the center left so-called Democrat, the ones that I've seen that that stretch the term is they've described Venezuela, some people, as Democrat. People that actually support I think both super far right wingers and people that support Venezuela, but not like Marxists or anything like that.
Yeah.
They've described it as democratic socialists because they have I believe that Hugo Chavez came to power in an election.
He came to power through numerous elections, and none of the Hugo Chavez coming to power had violent aspects to it.
I mean, he had coup attempts back in the 90s.
Coup attempts and defense against coup attempts, but in terms of taking power, there was no violent overthrow or violent engagement or insurrection. It was all through the elections.
I mean, even the fucking Carter Center, which is run by a guy who is great on DPRK relations, but is part of the reason why the fucking Taliban exists. One of the main reasons. I mean, he was the one that approved funding for it in '79.
Let's not forget the funding for the Contras too. That
started by him. Reagan just made it fucking worse. But the Carter Center said that Venezuela has some of the most democratic elections on Earth.
Yeah, under the leadership of Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro. This is the Carter Center saying this under their leadership, they have all come to power. Both of them have come to power every single time through a democratic election. Those are the only figure that you could even sort of describe as democratic socialist.
Yeah.
But it's the term. It's useless.
But the term sucks because, well, people who call themselves democratic socialists are just social democrats who think that they're socialists. And social democracy is not socialism. It used to mean that 100 years ago, but there was a split that caused that to not happen. And then that's just for ignoring the fact that democratic socialist is such a redundant term because socialism is the most democratic, system that exists in the world today.
I mean, there's a reason why Chavez and Nicolas Maduro, in any context that I can think of, I haven't seen one, there may be, but in every context I've seen them describing their ideology and what they push for, they just say they're socialists.
Or
Bolivarian.
Yeah. It's either Bolivarianism or socialism. That's the way they've never...
Or Chavismo or so forth.
That's I forgot about that. Yeah, Chavismo too.
I can't think of a kind of, and I may be wrong, there might be, but I can't think of an example where either one of them described what they were doing or themselves as democratic socialist.
Yeah, but that's just one example of that. I mean...
So another staying in the region and Bernie's response to it is Bolivia, which this is a case where we can give Sanders credit. Sanders has been good on Bolivia.
After his fucking supporters called him out on it.
Yeah, he was late to the punch on responding to the coup against Evo Morales and the Movement for Socialism party that occurred by Christian right-wing fundamentalists and fascists, flat-out fascists. People who fly Nazi flags and love to use a lot of Nazi iconography.
There's been there's been many cases of rape too.
Rape
from
and
their
murder
supporters.
of activists from the MAS and so forth. And Bernie was late to the punch on coming out with a response, but he did come out with a response, mostly because his supporters, which is the thing about Sanders himself can be absolute shit. Absolute garbage. We pointed out numerous occasions where he had the wrong fucking take. But his supporters a lot of times tend to be on the right side. His supporters tend to be better than him especially when it comes to foreign issues, because unlike him, they seem to actually give a shit about internationalism and solidarity with oppressed workers in other countries. They don't tend to be fans of bombing people in other countries because they create jobs at home. And so they pressured him through, at the time, I remember seeing it on his Twitter, at the time the coup happened, literally any time he tweeted anything, all the replies were nothing but, say something about Bolivia, talk about the coup, defend Morales, talk about this, why aren't you talking about this? And so for about a 3-day period of that happening, he eventually came out with a statement condemning it as a coup, one of the only candidates, I think, besides Gabbard, who said it was a coup, and that it was a usurping of the government, and just condemning it and calling it a coup. Yeah. Now, he, of course, engaged in the bullshit language of, they need to have elections, in da-da-da-da-da, that fucking bullshit. That almost anyone in the U.S. political context of that stature responded with. But he did go far enough to say it was a coup, and almost no one else would, especially people of his stature in American politics, and has come out in support of Evo Morales before, to the point where Evo Morales himself has, back in 2016, and I believe this time around too, has endorsed Bernie. and his run for president.
Yeah.
Back in the 90s, the throwback to there, we're a little over with the dates, but it's just nonetheless to talk about the
Oh, the
negatives.
extradition bill.
Yeah, he also in the 90s voted in favor of extraditing Assata Shakur from Cuba, which literally he had zero reason to vote for that.
There is no justification whatsoever for voting to extradite her back to the United States.
Either in a moral perspective or a political perspective. Like, what the fuck would that have done to him politically if he voted against it? Nothing. Who the hell was talking about, that wasn't the major political issue at the time. Like,
Most of the base doesn't even know who she is, like
No.
on either side.
and anyone, and the thing is that, and it's the common critique of Bernie, which I think is very true. It's I hate to fucking say it, even fucking Buttigieg gets it, which is fucking insane. Is that he talked about it at a debate, like, we shouldn't get muddled up with the whole being called socialists and shit like that, because it's no matter what position we take, we're going to be called socialists. Like, that's a clear-cut case. Bernie had no reason to vote for that, because either way, he's going to be attacked as some, communist-loving socialist.
Yeah, he's still called a crazy socialist anyways. It doesn't matter if he votes against extraditing Assata.
And at this point, he would in the 80s, he was hanging out with the Sandinistas, who he'd already been critiqued heavily for doing, wrongfully so, but he was. So, like, there's literally zero absolute reason to do it, politically, morally, so forth. So, just a case in his character, I think, more than just his record, even.
Yeah. Okay, so now that we're done with all of that, let's get into some of the... Because that's the reason... All those reasons that we just listed are the reasons why a lot of Marxists and leftists are saying, fuck that, we're not fucking doing that, we're not supporting Bernie, Bernie's pro-imperialist, or whatnot. Now let's get into the part that supports Bernie, and let's point out like some of the things that he's proposed, which I'm not saying that like, oh, that's great, but better than Trump and the neoliberals.
Yeah, so one case that was already mentioned was the Bolivia thing. Yeah. When a foreign policy was like, Bernie doesn't have a tendency to be good on foreign policy. Michael Parenti talks about this himself. And when he does, in the background, he's still shit, like the Iraq war vote and the Afghanistan, all that shit. How he talked about, it's not good, and he voted against the Iraq war authorization. But then, behind the scenes, on the lesser important votes, he was like, give them more money, more and more money. They need it, we need to help the troops get better weapons and bombs to kill brown children that we don't like, so we can get their resources and exploit their people. But the case of Bolivia, it was a good take on his part. He engaged in the bullshit mainstream rhetoric of the need elections and all that, but he nonetheless equivocally come out, declared it a coup, opposed it, and both then and previous times has expressed his support and solidarity with Evo Morales and his project of building socialism in Bolivia.
No, I would say that like all of his stronger points, I wouldn't say strong, his stronger points is on domestic policy. Now, he has proposed many times, I believe, he proposes this at least once a year, like to raise the minimum wage to 15. Right?
Yeah. He, almost every year, I believe since he's pretty much been in Congress, he's always introduced a bill to raise the minimum wage. And I think as most of recent, it has been repeatedly, year after year, to raise it to a $15 living wage, in his words.
Yeah. Well, the main thing that appeals to people on the left, the ones that support him, is, well, two main things. I actually know, probably more like three, maybe. I haven't seen people talk about the third one on much less. One, universal health care. The U.S. healthcare system is the worst in the world.
It's bad, folks.
Yeah. There's no government, there's practically no government subsidy. Obamacare, actually, I would say made it worse, to be honest.
Yeah, because it punished poor people for not having health care.
Because if you don't have health care, then you get penalized. But the thing is, paying the Obamacare, what is it?
The individual mandate.
If you it's actually it's less expensive, I believe, to pay the penalty than it is to pay the mandate.
Yeah, the mandate, the penalty. Or to pay for the health care than it is.
Premiums.
The premiums, yeah.
Yeah.
It for many people, it's legit cheaper to pay for the penalty for the individual mandate than actually paying for the health care itself, which is
It's a fucked up and it's a broken system.
And it's an amazing loop of fuckery because you, as a poor person and a working class person, are being punished for not having health care because you can't afford it. And the way you're being punished is you're given a penalty, a financial penalty, a heavy one, for not being able to afford health care. Like, the bullshit that just exudes from that is insane.
So Bernie is for Medicare for all. He says that has he specifically said single payer?
He is in favor of a single payer healthcare system without the allowance of private insurance companies.
It's so fucking funny because I've seen some of the arguments more recently that some of the neoliberals say, "Oh, well, you're just taking jobs from the insurance companies."
Yeah,
fuck the insurance companies. Like
Buttigieg has attacked him on that before for like, "Oh, you're gonna take away all."
I think Biden has too.
Yeah, they both have, and Buttigieg. It's funny because Buttigieg will attack him and say, "We're gonna take thousands of jobs away from insurance workers," which. One is bullshit because I'm sorry, they're already in the healthcare industry in that sense. They're just going to be transitioned in.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's
simple.
simple.
I don't understand how shit like that works.
Yeah, it's dumb. And Buttigieg is one to fucking talk because when he was working with McKinsey,
oh boy, yeah, McKinsey.
He literally assisted McKinsey in cutting the jobs of 1,000+ insurance workers here in the state of Michigan. So like. The fucking absolute gall to talk about Bernie taking away thousands of healthcare or insurance jobs from people by going to a universal healthcare system, a system that will help everyone, while literally doing that exact thing for nothing but profit is fucking hilarious in my opinion.
Yeah. So, yeah, he is for a universal healthcare system, but the problem is even if that is he wants to base it off of the Canadian or UK model. Now, the UK is about to not have public health care because Boris Johnson and the British government are trying to sell it
to us and our companies.
We're not gonna. Trump's not gonna buy it, but the companies.
Oh yeah, they'll buy it.
Oh yeah,
another.
And in Canada, which. The Canadian system sucks too.
Oh, the wonderful, great socialist bastion that is Canada. The system where literally the insurance is state-run, but all of the actual medical care that's provided is done through private corporations.
That's actually why a lot of Canadians come here.
Yeah, because they're run by private corporations. The actual care itself, you go to the hospital and it's privately run. The machine, you go get a CAT scan. The CAT scan machine is privately owned by a private medical corporation. And as a result, a lot of the medical equipment is not greatly up to date. And it causes a weird fuckery with that state-run insurance system and everything being private. As you said, a lot of Canadians will come here for health care, not to detract from a universal health care. I mean, having state-run insurance is better than nothing.
Yeah.
But they'll still come here to get treatment because a lot of their shit's insanely privately owned and they have a very smaller economic base in their medical care system as compared to us. Where, we do have a lot of advanced medical technology, but that's just because of the absolute breadth of the private capital involved in the U.S. healthcare system. Canada doesn't have that.
Well, because I was watching bits from his interview with Joe Rogan, the podcast interview he had a while ago. And
Joe Rogan?
Yes. And he said on the podcast,
well, we're not going to base it off of Cuba,
which should base it off. Cuba has the best.
You want a good healthcare system?
You base it off Cuba. You base it off Cuba.
So we're not trying to base it off Cuba. We're basing it off, the Nordic countries or Canada or the UK.
European social democratic shit, which
Just another case of his anti-communist vitriolic bullshit.
yeah.
Even
But-
though before in an interview with Amy Goodman with Democracy Now, he was asked about, because it is the time that Castro had died, he was asked, like, what is some of the good things about Castro? And he talked about, oh, their healthcare system's one of the best in the third world.
Yeah, he says
is the term
he makes
used.
sure to say third world.
But nonetheless, he was praising it as an amazing system. He said him and Jane went in on a visit and saw the hospitals, and they were amazing. But then, oh no, now, oh we're not basing it off of Cuba. Yeah, it's just he loves to be inconsistent, unfortunately.
Yeah. The second main point I have seen is that he has also argued for free college, that in general, not just like community or whatnot. Because I remember Obama used to kind of talk about making community college free, which never happened, but making, post-secondary education in general.
Completely debt-free.
Yeah.
Completely subsidized by the government.
Which to me sounds appealing to me, because someone who's about to go into college. But so I understand that aspect. I even jokingly said, "Well, I guess I got to sign up for the campaign to get my free college." But
Those free college bucks.
yeah, which I mean, so that would be nice. I wouldn't like not. I would prefer to not go into
Hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt.
because not only is the fucking loans, but the interest is so high. Even the state interest, private's actually worse.
And it's insane. Just a quick example on just how bad it is. I mean, many people here listening will probably know just how bad it is. But I have a doctor who is probably in his late 40s, I'd say, who to this day still owes hundreds of thousands. And he probably went back in the late 80s, early 90s when there was even still a semblance of some government assistance, because Pell Grants, they've been slowly being cut, and now that's almost nothing. But at a time when there was still probably some form of good Pell Grants, the government, he is still to this day, he has said that I am still paying off hundreds of thousands of dollars in student debt.
Oh yeah, doctor, that's 8 years at least.
Yeah, in
Medical
costs.
school, yeah. Well, if only Kamala was still running, because if he just opened up a small business, then he would
If
get
he
his
just
Pell
opened
Grants.
up a small business in the 5th Ward of the 4th District of the 2nd Township of the 5th County, and served to customers that earn at least $25,000 or below in income a year, and have 5 kids, 3 of which are currently in college themselves, getting student debt, then he would be covered. I mean, honestly, in retrospect, we don't even need universal college and debt-free college. We just needed Kamala's plan.
Exactly. Well, too bad that cop's out now. But then the final one, I saw you back at first when you were like big on before like the Maduro shit and everything. Your big thing was that this is the third one. I haven't really seen anyone else really talk about it. Is rent control?
Yeah,
he's the only candidate beside, right?
Yeah, he is the only candidate in, I think, modern history for president that has called for a national rent control.
Because everyone else is either we need a different plan or just no. I think, isn't Tulsi no?
Tulsi doesn't agree with rent control. Almost the usual, from my understanding, the usual plans that most candidates, even in the self-described progressive, your Obama when he was running originally in 2008, and Howard Dean when he was running in 2004 as a progressive, is the idea that we just need to increase subsidies of government housing.
Which, that doesn't solve anything. But, of course. So that's nice. It's a step in the right direction, I guess you could say. But of course, fuck landlords, though.
Fuck landlords. I mean, but honestly, if we're being honest here, I think, because I get all of my political basis from a comedian who actually isn't that funny, Hannibal Buress, who just loves to bask in the limelight of a funnier comedian, Eric Andre. honestly, that's bad because as the small owner of a 2-room apartment in Chicago, national rent control is going to make me a poor man. So that's why I am officially Nathaniel Maine in the mirroring of the great terrible comedian Hannibal Buress. I'm endorsing Andrew Yang because he's the one that truly has the policies that'll help the working people.
It's fucking funny. Because, he was good on the Cosby shit. But other than that, Eric's so much fucking better.
No,
I don't imagine fucking supporting Yang though. Like I never. No, I'm gonna be pissed. I'd fucking doubt anyway. I'm followed by a Yang ganger on Twitter. It's so fucking weird. Okay. No one from Yang gang nobody's gonna watch this podcast anyways. But no one from
thank
fucking
God. And if you are a Yang ganger, get the fuck out.
You're almost I fucking doubt someone from Yang gang would. Imagine just fucking supporting a guy whose only position is let's just give everyone $1,000 a month, but literally cut every social program you can think of.
Well, he's the ultimate grifter. Another case of why Eric Andre is a superior comedian, because honestly, if I was on the Bernie campaign, I wouldn't be 100% sure about doing this. Just knowing Eric Andre's history. But literally, they have had him in phone banking.
I would
for the campaign. I mean, it's great. It's just also it's Eric Andre.
Nice. He's trying to look. Bernie is obviously supporting the legalization of ranch, so that's why he's doing it. That's his.
We've got
issue.
a $15 minimum wage. We've got national rent control. We've got universal health care. We're going to legalize marijuana, and we're going to legalize ranch.
They once opened up a fucking ranch shop in Southern California. Those weed shops you see?
Yeah.
They opened up a ranch shop in fucking the middle of summer in Southern California. He said, at the end of the day, it smelled horrible.
I would imagine a shop filled with ranch in the rancid, humid heat of California.
Southern California.
Even better. But no, so all of that aside, those are the three big things that most people who support Bernie support and really like him for.
That I've seen. I could be wrong. There could probably be. I'm not wrong about that. I've seen it, but there could be other things. But that's
the thing about him is he's got such a broad range of domestic policies that appeal to so many different groups of people that he's amazingly good on domestic policy for what he is in our political context. He's not the second reincarnation of Stalin by any means, in terms of absolute pure Chad greatness. But for our political context and the fact that here in America, the only left-wing candidate that's allowed to actually have any chance, and he's not even being allowed, he's being fucked over any chance the establishment and the ruling elite can get. But the only person who can run left-wing is someone who, in most of Europe, would be considered a center right-winger.
Yeah, it's like what Parenti also said in that interview. He wouldn't even consider Bernie a social democrat. And I agree with him on this. He'd consider him a liberal democrat.
Yeah, he has said that he was talking about, is he a socialist?
Yeah, he's like, I don't even say he's a socialist or a social democrat. He's a liberal democrat. And that makes sense, too, because, Corbyn has called for... Aren't they privatizing railroads? Haven't they been privatizing railroads?
They privatized it in the 90s.
Yeah. He's been calling it, at least Corbyn, and I'm not that big of a fan of Corbyn. I know...
How dare you?
I know you used to, I know you used to before all the Brexit shit, but, I'm not that too big of a fan. I supported him during the election because, it was better than Boris, but he fucked up on Brexit. But
Corbynista.
Shut the fuck up. That's such a dumb term.
It really is.
Yeah, why is there a fucking ism for every single person who, talks about politics? It's not necessary.
Well, one of mine that I hate so much, it's so fucking shit, is Corbynistas. Fuck that. But I love the one that people have put on Bernie supporters. You've probably heard it. Sandinistas.
I've never heard that, actually.
Yep,
Never. I want to blow my head off just hearing it, though.
I've even seen people critiquing him from the left, calling his supporters Sandinistas. I think
This-
Jeffrey St. Clair, is one
Why?
from, like, Counterpunch.
Don't fucking use that term. That's legitimize. That's trying to legitimize it.
Yeah.
But no, Bernie has not called for nationalization of railroads. You said he about communications, but that's only you looked it up, but people have taken him out of context. He's not calling for the nationalization of like communications. He's calling for subsidizing what, like co-ops and stuff.
Subsidizing state and local run telecommunication agencies ran in that are state owned or publicly owned in his terminology, because by God say state owned.
Yeah.
And are based upon the principles like, democratically run and cooperatives and stuff like that. The stuff that gets Richard Wolff wet.
But no, he's the fucking right of fucking Roosevelt.
He is-
Franklin Roosevelt.
The only thing that Bernie has called for the nationalization of, which this is something that almost the rest of the world is like, you guys are like in the fucking 1800s. What the fuck are you doing? And that's the nationalization of basic public utilities like heat, water, and electric. Those are the only things he's called for, from my knowledge.
Ireland privatized their water.
But it's...
But Ireland's a fucking neoliberal hellscape right
It's
now.
bad.
So they don't even have a fucking legitimate left-wing party, but, well, neither do we. But,
You telling me the Democrats aren't hardcore Stalinists?
Shut the fuck up. Yeah, no, but they're neoliberal. Ireland's a neoliberal hellscape, but this is like basic fucking shit. It doesn't make him a fucking, social democrat or anything. That just makes him, just more liberal. Like he's the fucking left. He's the not even left. No, he's the right of fucking FDR. Like I think what was FDR's? What was the second Bill of Rights?
The second Bill of Rights the FDR proposed, he proposed, also known as the Economic Bill of Rights. And this is another policy Bernie's great on. It's actually really good, and I'm a fan of it. But it's his federal jobs guarantee.
Uh-huh.
But it was from the FDR proposed originally, where every worker would have a right to a job. Every worker has a right to health care, or every person has a right to health care, and every person has a right to housing, and every person has the right to an income that'll allow them to provide for themselves and their family. And involved with that was a lot of programs that were established during the New Deal and were planned to be established that makes Bernie look like a right-winger.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a fun anecdote, but I mean, there was literally an agency, I can't remember the name of it, that because a thing that was happening during the New Deal is that FDR began sending diplomats and government officials over to the Soviet Union to study how they were responding to the Depression and figure out, what are they doing and can we apply it here? One of the cool things that FDR did in his list of also not good things he did, but they came back here and they're like, yeah, they're collectivizing agricultural and industry and all that, and they've rode the Depression to fucking amazing waves. They've advanced during the Depression. He created an agency for agriculture that essentially what they were doing was going in.
Or is that something else? No, that's the fucking Stop Farmers.
It's one that's not talked about at all when people learn about the agencies, because what it was doing was essentially going in and collectivizing agriculture and farms.
Collectivizing.
Straight up collectivizing, buying out privately owned farms and taking it into state control.
That's nationalizing. That's not collectivizing.
Well, I mean, the goal was to collectivize most of the agriculture under the collectivized state authority because of just all the fucking problems that were being had. But it's shit like that that makes Bernie, in comparison to FDR, Bernie looks like a right-winger.
Yeah, but the main criticism I've seen from from the leftists that don't support it, and this is a good point, is that well, one of the main criticisms that I've seen from Marxists that don't support Bernie is that that when the programs like this happen, they usually come from off the backs of colonized territories and colonized people, and that's true because the origins of social democracy come from imperialism, when the capitalists were extracting super profits and using it to essentially bribe the workers to submit to capitalist hegemony, which has been the primary argument for people. And the counter argument has been, okay, well, we need to help the people we can in short term. We don't want to be accelerationists and vote for fucking Trump.
Harm reduction.
Yeah. I think I don't really take either side. Like, personally, I think what he's getting from the fucking neoliberals is bullshit. The slander. I don't agree with that at all. I think he's definitely better than the fucking neoliberals. He's 1,000 times better than fucking Yang, who's a fucking ANCAP, pretty much.
Essentially.
Yeah. The fucking UBI is from Milton Friedman. So freedom dividend. That's what it was called.
Gotta get those freedom bucks, literally what he calls them.
And he's fucking weird.
Let's not talk about his racism either. Or his massive following amongst fascists.
Oh yeah.
Or just let's ignore that right now.
But let's just. So I understand that. I definitely rather have a Bernie Sanders than a Hillary Clinton or an Andrew Yang or even a Donald Trump. But personally, I am not gonna vote for him because his record's just too damning, especially his record on foreign policy and Asada and everything like that. I'm not going to, like, there's been some people on the left that, so this whole Asada thing and Yugoslavia and the funding and the sanctions, it's just too much. So I'm not going to, confront people on Twitter, be like, oh, you're imperialist if you support. I don't agree with that at all. I'm not. If you support him, that's fine. It's like, I get it. I'm not going to, like, confront people, say, oh, you're an imperialist if you support. I get why you would support Bernie Sanders, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just pretty much remaining neutral on the subject.
Yeah, that's where I'm at as well. My kind of view on it is that if he wins the nomination, cool. If he wins the presidency, cool. But also not cool too because of his shit fucking foreign policy record, and so forth. And I'm not. I've done work with the campaign previously back in 2016.
Fucking social fascist.
A self-declared social fascist here.
God damn it.
No. In about early middle last year, I had gotten convinced that he was good, and was doing some work and shit, and I've stopped that at this point, especially after his response to Venezuela, and being a total fuck up on that. So, like, I'm not going to put any work into the campaign. I'm not donating to the campaign. I'm not going to be out there propagandizing for him, saying, you need to go out and vote for Bernie. If you vote for Bernie, fine. I understand that. I get that. And that's cool. It's fine. It's whatever. I just also think it's important to note that if you're someone who does go out and vote for Bernie, you also have to put in the work on the ground in building the movements to progress socialism and so forth. Voting for Bernie is not going to solve everything.
No, it's not. The one thing though I really will say though is if people start thinking that, well, he's the end all be all, he's not. And I saw a good point made that people say, well, Bernie's been making, the American public more left. I would disagree with that. I think that the modern conditions have been making the public more far left. I think that Bernie Sanders, like Donald Trump, is a byproduct of the system. It's a part. It's a part of the. It's a part of like the ruling class. Well, not like the whole. But there have been some members of the ruling class that are pro Sanders. Very little.
Yeah, there's groups of people, like there's millionaires for Sanders and shit.
Yeah, but those people, I think they want to harken back to the old social democratic days because they realize that neoliberalism is not working, and people are becoming more class conscious about it because this labor aristocracy that existed in the mid 20th century, it's dwindling more and more to the point where people are being pushed more and more into poverty. And so Bernie Sanders kind of represents to me this, this faction of people, that these labor aristocrats are the former ones that want to harken back to the, the good old days, because he often mentions, because that's what all these politicians, is all what they do. They don't talk about going forward.
No.
It's either Trump talking about, or the conservatives talking about like the good old days back in the 50s when, we used to spray the water hoses at black protesters, and
again, yeehaw.
Or it's people like Bernie that say, well, remember back in the 30s when FDR did all these social and economic acts and stuff like that.
Yep.
There's no drive to move forward, and that's just capitalism right there, because you can't move forward from where this overly advanced capitalism is at this point.
No, and the only way you're moving forward is under its conditions.
Yeah. So Bernie Sanders didn't make the public more far left, or not more left. It was the conditions that did. Bernie is just a byproduct of those conditions that is essentially trying to stop, pure socialism and replace it with this weird liberal dem,
sock demish kind
yeah.
of thing. And I think it's to be said that, like, I agree, Bernie hasn't shifted the populist left or open people to the left. I think the conditions have done that, and I also think it's not good to place him in this great man of history kind of figure, and that he is the cause of this resurgent left movement and anti-war movement and so forth. It's a byproduct of the conditions. The only thing I'd say that Bernie has done is that he's brought to the modern discourse the concept that there is a left.
Yeah.
But that's all. He hasn't done anything to, he's not the reason why there are resurgent, growing numbers of Marxists and Marxist-Leninists and so forth. Mm-hmm. He doesn't outlay a specific socialist vision. Or even a vision that you could even come close to saying is socialist or left in a true sense of the word. But all he's done is just that, well, it's no longer the consensus of the neoliberal consensus that there's, something different.
Yeah.
But he hasn't put out what that difference is. That's been discovered by the people seeing these conditions and trying to find a way out of the fucking hellscape that is modern capitalism that we live under.
It's honestly kind of insulting to organizers who've been working their whole lives, like leftist, socialist, and communist organizers who've been working their whole lives just to have all the credit given to some, liberal Democrat from Vermont who really doesn't, who in the context of the world of the geopolitical context isn't even that radical to the capitalist standards.
No, like to harken back to the opposition of the Iraq War, for example, he led the effort in the House to oppose the Iraq War, the very small effort. But the anti-war movement that came out of the Iraq War, like, for example, you can't place that on a single figure. You can't place that on a Bernie. Like, in the same way you can't place the modern left movement and resurgence on Bernie. I mean, what caused it was the work of groups like the Answer Coalition and The anti-war groups like Code Pink and the work of their organizers, and groups like Moratorium Now and so forth. It's not this one figure. It was all of these groups working and putting in the work as a mass movement to oppose the war. And the same thing is true of today. This massive resurgent left that we're seeing, well, I'd say for the American context, massive, is not the doing of Bernie Sanders. It's the doing of all of the mostly amazing activists, great people and organizers and revolutionaries who've put the work in on the ground for decades through struggle and hardships and government crackdowns and opposition from both parties and from the mainstream media and the elite, and who have fought and have struggled to create the conditions that allow for the left that we are seeing rising today. It's not Bernie. It's not, it's not Dennis Kucinich. It's not Tulsi Gabbard. It's not Howard Dean. It's not any of those fuckers. It's the people.
Yeah.
Well, with all of that being said, I think this is a good point to wrap up the episode. You can find Workers' Truth on YouTube, and hopefully soon podcast listening apps such as Castbox, Stitcher, and so on.
If you have any topic recommendations or suggestions, you can leave them in the comments, and we'll be sure to read them.
This has been Workers' Truth. Thanks for listening, and solidarity.